This is the first video in the series of videos dealing with Excel Unit D, which is entitled Working with Charts. Worksheets provide an effective layout for calculating and organizing data, but the grid layout is not always the best format for presenting your work to others. To display information it's easier to interpret, you can create a chart. And charts, which are also called graphs, represent information in a pictorial format, making it easier to see patterns, trends, and relationships. In this unit, you're going to learn how to create a chart, how to edit the chart, change the chart type, how to add text annotations and arrows, and how to preview and print the chart. And you can take a look. Our objectives will help us meet those goals, which is planning charts, creating charts, moving and resizing charts, changing the chart design, changing the chart layout, formatting a chart, annotating and drawing on a chart, and creating a pie chart. Now, of course, one of the first things that you want to do, and before you actually create a chart, you need to plan the information you want your chart to show and how you want it to look. Planning ahead helps you to decide what type of chart to create and how to organize the data. Understanding the parts of a chart makes it easier to format it and change specific elements so that your chart will best illustrate your data. And of course, there's some general guidelines that you want to use when you're planning a chart. And the first thing on there is that you do want to determine the purpose of the chart and identify the data relationship you want to communicate graphically. And you want to create a chart that shows the information that's going to best illustrate what you're trying to show in there. In our Quest Specialty Travel file that we're going to be working with, we're going to be showing this as quarterly information or every 3 months information that's on there. So you have to determine what you really want to show. Then you have to determine the results you want to see and decide which chart type is most appropriate. And of course, different chart types display data in distinctive ways. For an example, a pie chart compares parts to a whole. So it's useful for showing what proportion of a budget amount was spent on print ads relative to what was spent on direct mail or radio commercials. Of course, a line chart, in contrast, is best for showing trends over time. To choose the best chart type for your data, you should first decide how you want your data to be displayed and interpreted. So you have to determine which chart's going to make the best visual representation of your data. If you're looking on page 81, there is a table that's on there that talks about the different types of charts that are available, such as column, line, pie, bar, area, and scatter, and a brief description on what each of them shows, or what it helps to do in your presentation of your data. The third thing that you want to do is you want to identify the worksheet data you want your chart to illustrate. And sometimes you want to use all the data in your worksheet to create a chart, while at other times you may want to select a range within the sheet. And the worksheet from which you are creating your chart contains revenue data from the past year, and that's what we're going to be working on during this area. So you can either choose all the data or just limited bits of data. And finally, you need to understand the elements of a chart. And some of these chart's elements are, first of all, the horizontal axis is what we call the x-axis, and we also call that the category axis on there. And of course, that is the chart that runs straight up and down, or the axis that runs straight up and down. Then we have, that's our horizontal axis, runs from side to side on there. On there, it does run side to side. The vertical axis is the one that runs straight up and down. That's what we call the y-axis, and we typically call that the value axis in Excel. Now there is a z-axis, which is present in 3D charts. Now, of course, the area inside the horizontal and vertical axis is what we call the plot area. Now, the scale of measurement on the y-axis is what we call tick marks, and we'll take a look at some examples of these here in just a little bit. Of course, we have data points, which is the value in a cell that you select for your chart. A data marker visually represents each of the data points in the chart. A group of related data points is what we call a data series, and a legend makes it easier to identify each data series. So if we take a look on here, we can see that, first of all, here's our vertical axis, and this is what we call our value axis as well on there. And of course, here's our tick marks, and they're the little lines that run straight across. It allows for easier tracking of data. So we can see that, here's the $70,000 mark, and even though that over here it's going to meet it, but it didn't meet it anywhere else, we can easily follow that back and see where the value is at. Of course, we have our data markers, and that is the individual columns in this case that's on there, and that's a data marker. A data series is a group of data markers. Of course, our plot area is all this area right here. That's the visual part of the chart. Either it's part of the pie chart, or in this case, the column chart. We have our horizontal axis right here, and that is what we call, once again, our category axis. And here's our different categories that we're going to be looking at. Of course, we also have our legend as well, and our legend gives us the information on how to match up what each of these colors represent. And then, of course, up here we have a data point. So even though that we have our data marker showing the whole area, this data point is right up here at the top, and that is really where the value is at. Okay, let's now take a look on page Excel 82. And what we're going to do on page Excel 82 is that we're going to start creating our chart on there. And of course, to create a chart in Excel, you first select the range in a worksheet containing the data you want to chart. Once you've selected the range, you can use buttons on the Insert tab of the ribbon to create and modify a chart. Of course, step 1 wants you to open up this file right here, and that is the EXD1 file, and you can do that from Core Sites. And then you want to do a Save As. We are going to name this file Quarterly Tour Revenue. And we're going to save this either into your My Documents or into your home drives. Now, once we have that done, we want to go on down to step 2. Step 2 tells us we want to select the range A4 to E12. Now, notice one thing that's on there is that we're not going to select the totals, because the totals will just throw off our chart. We want to select just the data. We do not want to select any totals. Once we have that selected, and of course we do want to select as well the labels for it, both the column labels and the row labels as well on there for our headings. Next, we're going to click on the Insert tab on the ribbon, and the Insert tab contains groups for inserting various types of objects, which does include charts, which is where we're going to work at right here. Now, the Charts group includes buttons for each major chart type, plus an Other Charts button for additional chart types, such as stock charts, and which is used for charting stock and market data. But we're not going to get into those other charts on there during this lesson. What we are going to do is we're going to click on the Column Chart button, which is right here in our Charts group. And notice that when you click on that, it brings up a selection there. And we're going to click on the Clustered Column button on the column palette on there. And of course, our cluster column is the first one in the 2D column area. When we click on that, you'll notice that we now have a chart. And of course, the chart is inserted in the center of the worksheet. And 3 contextual chart tool tabs open up on the ribbon, which now we see that there's the Design, the Layout, and the Format tabs. Now on the Design tab, which is currently in front and which is currently open right here, you can quickly change the chart type, chart layout, and chart format as you swap between the data and swap the data between the rows and the columns. And that's what we're going to get ready to do here. But this is where it's the ultimate how it looks. It's the design of it on there. Of course, we're going to be taking a look at switching the row and column data, because it's going to be a little bit easier to kind of take a look at this. So sometimes this makes a little bit more sense. Other times it makes a little bit more sense to maybe look at it per quarter and have the different columns. So we're going to take a look at that here. And which that's what we're going to do in step 4. We're going to click the Switch Row Column button, because sometimes this works out. If we take a look, notice that what it's done is that it's kind of flipped our chart around. Instead of having the 4 bars on the side over here, for quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4, with all the countries underneath there, it flip-flopped those around. So now we have 4 down here across the horizontal axis, and then we have these multiple bars, one for each country that's there. And it says, so the quarterly revenues are charted along the horizontal axis and the countries are plotted as data points in this case. However, it's a little bit easier if we click undo, and this looks a little bit clearer and it's a little bit easier to read. That way, so we can see how each country has progressed over time. Next, we're going to go to step 6. And step 6 tells us that we want to click on the Chart Tools Layout tab. So we're going to click on this Layout tab right up here, and we're going to click on the Chart Title button, and that is in the Labels group. And of course, this is where we can change some of the layout. We can, all the labels, the axis, the backgrounds, and a lot of other things that we can use to change how this chart is laid out. But we're going to click on the Chart Title or button on here, and then we're going to click on Above Chart. Now, of course, we can center it over, center the overlay title. That's without resizing the chart. But we're going to click on Above Chart, which will actually resize our chart just a little bit. Once we have that, we're going to click right where it says Chart Title here. And this is step 7. We click on Chart Title. Hit our Control and A, which is going to select all of the chart title. And we're going to type in the chart title that we want, which is Quarterly Tour Revenue. And then to deselect that, we just click anywhere else in there. So now notice that we've changed the layout by adding in a chart. And of course, adding the title helps identify the chart. This chart is known as what we call an embedded chart because it's inserted directly into the worksheet. Now, there are sizing handles, and that's the series of small dots, or the little right here. You can see that in the corners, and in the middle there are sizing handles. And that is what you use to resize your chart. Of course, your chart might be in a different location on the worksheet and may look slightly different. You will move and resize this in our next video that we're going to be taking a look at. Now, anytime a chart is selected, as it is now, a blue border surrounds the worksheet data, and a purple border surrounds the row labels, and a green border surrounds the column labels. Embedding a chart in the current sheet is the default selection when creating a chart, but you can also place the chart on a different sheet in a workbook or on a newly created chart sheet. And a chart sheet is a sheet in the workbook that contains only the chart which is linked to the workbook data. And that concludes video 1 on here, where we talked about planning a chart and creating a chart. In our next video, we're going to be talking about moving and resizing a chart. So on step 8, make sure that you do save your work and you're ready to move on to the next video.